Hi, welcome to the Daiku Podcast and Daiku Game Pitch. I'm Gary Snow. Today I'm joined by Stephen Alexander, the creative mind behind Huckleberry, a dark and weird game inspired by mythology of the American Old West. Stephen, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Well, Huckleberry, and I love the name that you chose because it's like, I'll be your Huckleberry from Tombstone,
Yep.
which is super cool. I love that. But we're going to talk all about Huckleberry and your new game and the Weird West. But first of all, just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in this crazy little hobby of ours.
Yeah. So the first time I was introduced to a role playing game was Dungeons and Dragons Third Edition. I was in the fourth grade, and it was on the bus after school. I had a half-hour long bus ride because I lived way out in the country. And one of my neighbors was a geeky little kid who had a giant book in his backpack, and he pulled it out and started showing me the pictures. And I've been hooked ever since. It's really been lifelong for me to be in the hobby. Of course, there are times where I wasn't able to, find players like everyone else who's ever played a tabletop RPG. But I really just jumped back into the deep end probably about 10 years ago now. My wife had never actually played RPGs. She did a lot. She and I would play a lot of board games. But we had some neighbors who said, "Hey, you want to play some Pathfinder?" And we said, "Yeah." And that just kind of it set off a spark that I forgot I had. And I've been headlong into all sorts of RPGs and systems ever since. It's been a blast.
And how does your wife like role playing games? Has she did she go, wow, this is like the most amazing thing ever? Or does she kind of placate you and go, oh, yeah, that's fun?
So my wife is the most lovely person ever, and she does have a bit of an inner geek as well. If she can play like a drow rogue that can just stab someone in the back, left and right, she is incredibly happy. She loves playing the sneaky little sneak with some sharp daggers.
Well, it sounds like she's enjoying role playing games, so that's super cool. And so, when did you first get the spark for Huckleberry, and how did you like? I know that we talked a little bit before we started recording about the lollygaggers, and maybe just talk about how this all came to be in the first place.
Yeah, so that's really two different things that just were interwoven together. So the lollygaggers, I got started streaming and making content for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. And I still love D&D. I don't play it as much as I used to, but I have a deep passion for it just because of everything that it's brought and introduced into my life. Um, but I realized that video editing is hard. And doing a couple videos a week, it wasn't the type of thing that I was suited for. And it kind of that channel fizzled out, but it opened up so many networking opportunities. And through that, I met people like Adventures in Lollygagging and several other streaming channels. And I started appearing as a cast member on those channels. And Jeff Baker, the driving force behind the Lollygaggers, is just a lovely person. And we hit it off. I hit it off with all the Lollygaggers because they're all amazing people. And I'm the type of person that if I find someone who's like a lovely person, I just dig my claws in and I'm not letting go. Like, you are staying in my life. Whether you like me or not, we're going to be friends now. And that's kind of how it was with the Lollygaggers. It's like, I'm here to stay. And it's been a wonderful experience because Adventures in Lollygagging plays all sorts of systems. With them, I've probably played a dozen different tabletop RPG systems. It really broadened my horizons. It's not like I was exclusive to D&D 5e, but being able to play so many indie games with a great group of people who, we all embrace the game, we all embrace the story, we embrace the mechanics. It really just it opened me up to a whole new world of tabletop that I knew existed, but I had only scratched the surface of. As for Huckleberry, how that got started, um, I'm a big fan of Hellboy the comics, as we'll probably talk about later on. And Huckleberry started because I wanted to make a game that encapsulated the Hellboy experience. And I was creating a game called The Bureau, where you played like 1930s FBI investigators in a supernatural world. And somehow that system morphed into Old West, Weird West. It still kept the horror aspects, it still kept a lot of the investigation, but I realized that my niche as a storyteller, as a designer as well, is the Western genre. And something about combining the two just it started creating magic. They blended so well together. The mechanics blended well, the setting blended well, and it just the bureau was like a fun little side project that I'm like, okay, this is fun to work on. When I started working on Huckleberry, I'm like, oh, this could go the distance. This is something that'll pass the finish line. And that all started while I was with the Lollygaggers. So Jeff is editor on Huckleberry. He's also the publisher of Huckleberry because when I was creating Huckleberry, I knew that this would be a full game. I knew I would be self-publishing, and I went to Jeff and I said, "Hey, I could just slap together a logo and make up some words and publish under that, or we could publish under Lollygagging, which is a brand that we both genuinely love, and they could work together." And Jeff is incredibly supportive of the entire thing. He's been with me from day one. He's had my back on everything, and it really was just fate to work out. They just wove together so perfectly and were hand in hand the whole way.
And how long have you, like, from now to where it is now, which I know it's still a work in progress, but how long have you been working on it up until now?
So Huckleberry, after it like changed, has been about a year. But the threads of it, the core mechanics, go back probably about 3 years. The actual system, which we'll get into later, where you roll the two dice and you look for the target number, that came to me several years ago. I've been working on it. I've been playtesting it in various formats. Uh, but then actually the setting, all the character ideas, all the character traits, the majority of Huckleberry happened within the last year.
Cool. Well, without any further ado, let's bring up Huckleberry, a Weird West RPG. And you can already see from the beginning, you might have a good hand here, but it's not the hand you kind of want to have. Just so tell us the Weird West, and maybe even going into like your love of old westerns and that kind of thing. Do you have like favorites that kind of
I
that you've
absolutely
watched over
do.
the years?
So even the hand on the screen here, that's a reference to the dead man's hand, aces and eights, and it's supposed to be a jack kicker, but I've changed it to a joker. Uh, there's so much mythology and storytelling that goes hand in hand with the Old West, both historically and as a genre in media. And I've done my very best to just litter in as many Easter eggs as possible. So the dead man's hand here, of course, being one of them. When it comes to like movies and things like that, Tombstone is definitely up there. It's a major influence on this game. One of my personal favorites is the Lonesome Dove miniseries and the novel. The novel is good as well. I really love just the idea of the Hat Creek outfit, going on this long drive and the trials and tribulations that happen along the way. Um, there's just so many elements of westerns that can scratch an itch for you, no matter what type of genre or stories you like to tell. It's a great setting for storytelling and especially character-driven stories.
Well,
So I honestly could go on forever. Unforgiven, uh, Tombstone. I even like some of the more cheesy ones like Silverado and stuff like that. I'll go as far back as you want.
well, just like pulp novels for fantasy, like I think about like the Louis L'Amour novels,
Yes.
and I imagine there is just a treasure trove of plot ideas in the Louis L'Amour novels, and they're kind of quick and easy reads as far as like, okay, here's our base setting, and like let's just like make it weird after that, and kind of add to it. But there's just probably just a ton of I guess, stories and ideas to draw from. Just like a detective show or
Absolutely.
whatever, like, you just like there's hundreds and hundreds.
And it goes back so far. Like the Western genre is one of the oldest genres there is. And even going back to, like Gary Cooper and High Noon, that's a story that still resonates today. It's very powerful and it's told expertly. And for a genre to have a movie that's 70 some years old that's still powerful, it shows that there's something special about it.
Well, I totally agree, and I live in Calgary, Alberta. We are home of the Calgary Stampede, which is the greatest outdoor show on earth, and for about 10 days, everybody in Calgary dresses up as cowboys. So it's kind of our thing here. But let's talk
Yeah.
about the vibes that you're bringing to your game here. So we got
Yeah.
Hellboy
So,
and Tombstone, which we already talked about.
yeah, I've got two cultural touchstones here that I draw from. Specifically, these are the things that I go to for like what kind of stories I think Huckleberry tells best. That's not what it's limited to because tabletop RPGs, you're limited only by your imagination. But when I was making the game, I really went to Hellboy for the folk horror aspects because I loved like the idea of the backwoods magic, that fairy tale logic contrasting against the technological advances of the era. Um, uh, so one of the themes in Huckleberry as well is that there's a lot of capitalism, there's a lot of industrialization, and these two things are sort of at odds with each other. And neither force is necessarily a good force because the robber barons of the time are exploiting people, and the magic is a very evil, dark magic. And your characters are kind of stuck in between, a rock and a hard place, and they have to find a way to survive, which leads into how most of these stories start with a bounty, where you start with an investigation. You're trying to solve a problem, and then that leads into an action showdown. This is a western. You're meant to use your guns, so you have to figure out what is the actual issue, and then you blow it to bits. And your what I also draw from Hellboy is that your characters are uniquely suited to the job. So you're not necessarily superheroes. It's not like you become godlike as the game progresses. In fact, it's the opposite. You develop wear and tear on your character as the game goes on. But you are capable of tapping into a supernatural force that most people cannot tap into. And that just gives you the slightest little edge that allows you to perform this job better than anyone else could. From Tombstone, we draw the if you could go back a slide, sorry. It's a full throttle Western. It's meant to encapsulate all of the ideas and stereotypes that you would expect from a Western. You're able to ride horses, you're firing six shooters. It's very character driven, and it really has all of the cheesiness that you would expect wrapped into that horror setting. Because let's be honest, it's a tabletop RPG. We're going to be making jokes at the table, even if it's a horror game. You can't help but break the tension a little bit there, and it really lines up well with the Western setting. We also take cinematic action from Tombstone. I say cinematic more than narrative because they mean very similar things, but narrative has a whole different context in RPGs that Huckleberry doesn't necessarily align with that, but it is cinematic. We're not focused on like exactly how many feet away something is or exactly how far you can go. It's meant to keep the focus where it matters. It's meant to have your actions are meant to have impact, and we want to encourage that and promote that in the scene that happens. And also from Tombstone, you can't do it alone. Wyatt Earp needed his brothers, needed Doc Holliday. This is a game that encourages teamwork and playing together. There's a lot of ways that you can boost each other, even without special abilities. There's just basic actions where you can assist people in combat and you can build up momentum. And if you help someone else build up momentum, that makes it easier for them to do it. And then another person, and there's a sort of special magic that happens when you have a team that's really working together. Everything just clicks and it feels incredibly satisfying. Which kind of leads us into the Mavericks then. The Mavericks are these occult bounty hunters. You hunt down corruptions of this force called the Wyrd. Sometimes people have been corrupted and mutated by the Wyrd. Sometimes it's animals that have been corrupted by it, or perhaps an artifact or something like that. It's also the force that you can kind of tap into, like I mentioned before, which allows you to be the person who can take it on. You use it against itself, so to speak. You're mercenaries. You're not heroes. You're doing this for a paycheck. you are doing good deeds by taking these things on, but it requires a sort of craziness to want to take on this job that's incredibly dangerous. And you also have to be tough enough to come back alive and then crazy enough to go back and do it again. So it's sort of easy to look like a hero because so many people in the world are villains that you are confronting, but that doesn't necessarily make you a good person. It just means that you're a little bit off. And like I said, Mavericks can tap into the weird. They can control their fate. A big part of this game is giving the players agency to kind of balance out things in their favor. And the weird is the narrative reason for that to happen. And that brings us to the weird then, which, oh, I'm sorry, you have a question?
Yeah, well, what I was gonna ask you about is, the art, because, like, we're already kinda, like, a few
Yes,
slides in
yes.
here, and it's incredible art. Let's maybe just talk to us how that all came to be and the artist involved.
The art is by the amazing George Sellis, and the book's graphic design and layout is by Nathan D. Paoletta of Worldwide Wrestling fame. George is a delight to work with. He's just a lovely person. I've worked with him before previously on other projects, and when Huckleberry was shaping up and I knew I needed to commission art, he was the only name that I had in mind. I knew that I had to get on his schedule because I can give him just a couple lines of like this crazy idea in my head, and he just comes back with something that's incredibly evocative. It's got little details of the character. He puts so much love and passion into it. It's just been a pleasure to work with him, and it's been a pleasure to work with Nathan as well. The graphic design, when it came to actually putting together the PDF and the character sheet, he paid so much attention to detail, putting in little things that you wouldn't expect. Like we'll talk about the character sheet later, but there are sliders on the side of icons where you can keep track of things in game. And the way he went about putting it together, you could just tell that they both take so much pride in their work. I'm biased, admittedly, but I feel like Huckleberry is worth it just for the visual aspects alone. They've really made a beautiful book together. I'm incredibly thankful to be able to work with both of them.
Yeah, it absolutely is incredible, and that was the first thing that kind of struck me is, like you said, mechanics, writing aside. I hate to say it, but the art itself is amazing. But not to discount
No,
your own work into it, but it's pretty incredible. It
I
is like a
I
Hellboy
completely see that as a
graphic novel.
compliment. Yeah, because let's be honest, art sells books. When I'm buying a tabletop RPG, and I see a beautiful cover, I am so much more likely to buy that book regardless of what's inside it. And I buy a lot of tabletop RPGs, so that might just be my own buying habits. I spend way too much on them. But yeah, you want a book that looks beautiful on the shelf because let's also be honest, you don't always get them to the table. So you want to be able to be happy. You want to be able to feel that happiness just looking at it. Proud to own the book. And that's what I wanted to really pursue, which is why I wanted to work with people who put as much passion into it as they do.
Cool. Okay, let's get into the weird. Tell us more about the weird.
So the weird is like this supernatural sort of radiation, and it corrupts everything in time. It's this force of nature, and everyone knows about the weird in the setting. It's not that this is a hidden thing. It's something that people have to deal with in their day to day lives. It cannot be prevented. It cannot be cured. So oftentimes, the way the weird shows up is it can build up in your system and it affects everyone differently. It's very fickle, it's very unpredictable. Some people who get off lucky, it just means that their skin has slight mutations, like maybe there's a buildup of blue, like silver deposit in their skin, and it just gives them a different tint. Other people, like our Reaper here on the page, it could mean that you come back in death as a monstrous creature. It can also mean that you mutate very strangely in real time. You may grow extra limbs. There's a lot of body horror in this game. It's something that I really am drawn to, and it just looks amazing, especially when George is drawing it. So that's a big part of how the weird affects things. And those are the types of things that you go after because not only does it affect your body, but it usually affects your mind as well. And it can mean not necessarily that you go feral, but you become twisted, you become corrupted as well. It's a mind, body, soul corruption, and it gives a lot of narrative freedom when you're creating your bounties, when you're creating your storylines of how you can have wildly different monsters and creatures for your players to battle. And then also not necessarily feel bad about killing this person because they have been corrupted and there is nothing else that can be done for them. They have become evil essentially. The weird is your fate, it's your doom, and it's possibly your salvation. Like I've said, Mavericks can ever so slightly tap into the weird. The weird itself, it's a play on words. It comes from a Norse word meaning fate or destiny. And then we pronounce it like weird as in strange. So we kind of combine those two in Huckleberry. And everyone succumbs to the weird eventually, or they die before it takes a hold of them. But if you can ever so slightly twist it in your favor, if you can control your luck, if you can control your destiny, you might be able to get the best positive outcome of this. And that's what Mavericks try to do. They try to tap into it and they try to control their luck to the best of their abilities. The weird can be manipulated, but at a cost. Weird magic requires someone to like purposefully corrupt a catalyst, whether that is like an actual like animal sacrifice or blood sacrifice, or there are other things like corrupting literature, corrupting art. That's a big theme in Huckleberry. That it's essentially distilled emotion. Someone has poured a whole bunch of emotion in there, and if you can corrupt that, you can corrupt something very, very powerful. Which brings us to the world.
Yeah, and
Yeah, go ahead.
maybe and before I get like we get more into the world, as far as like the historical timelines and time frames, like talk to us about your decision making as far as like how did you kind of fit the weird into like a real historical setting?
So that's actually this next point. That's perfect. So the Huckleberry is set in a actual part of the world, but Earth as we know it has ended. There's a lot of mythology of it's called the fourth world or fifth world mythology, and it's very common in the Southern America and then Central America. Um, in Essentially, there is a prophecy that we live in the fourth world and that will end, and people will migrate into a new world. And that's what Huckleberry supposes has happened. So in Huckleberry, Earth as we know it, with America, with Mexico, like that area that we really focus on, uh, that has ended, and people have migrated into the next world. This is a world that's uninhabited. There are ruins of people who used to live there, but no one knows what happened to those people. So it really is a whole new frontier. And it's got all sorts of people because the Exodus began in the years after the American Civil War, and it lasted for a decade or so, and then ended about 30 years before Huckleberry is set. So people are in this new world, but there's still a lot of cultural ties to the old world. People still may identify as being American. They may identify as being Ende or Ashiwi. There's a lot of different elements that you may be tied to, but how deep is that tie when the world no longer exists? That's something that gets played with a lot. And it also means that like a lot of the societal structures that exist are gone. So there is no federal government whatsoever. The US government was not able to make that transition. They died with the old world. Now law is much more localized, and it's only as far as a sheriff is willing to ride. And who knows how corrupt that sheriff may be, anyways. Um, so this new world is where the weird is permeate what it permeates, and what it's just uh the new world is where the weird exists. It's an element of this new section.
Is there still like the North American kind of continent, like the maps and everything like that, or did you kind of just keep it more vague?
So the actual map of Huckleberry does exist, but it's not going to be released because I want to be able to let game masters be able to decide where things are and keep it vague. But no, essentially, the migration happened with a goddess or a mythical being calling to certain peoples, and they went into caves, and then they came out the other side of a cave in a whole new world, and you could not go back. It was a one-way trip. So we're drawing on a lot of indigenous mythology there in a hopefully respectful way. I've tried to come from a I do not want to capitalize on another culture's mythology, and I've worked with a lot of sensitivity experts as well on this. So hopefully people will see this and see that we're trying to be respectful. But
And
the idea is that the old world is literally gone. There is no more North America. But that said, if you want to say that you are from Texas, if you want to say you're from New Mexico, that's still very much a possibility. And there's still a lot of those same ties. So all of that knowledge that we have built in of the Western setting is not erased. You don't need to learn a whole new setting for this. But there's also a lot of wiggle room for people who don't really know Westerns that well. It makes it a little bit more accessible. And it allows people to come in and just be able to say, no, I'm not going to deal with that if I don't want to. That type of thing.
okay, and water in the water barons, and talk to us about how that plays into
Yes.
the world.
So that goes back to the weird. The weird corrupts everything, but it especially corrupts water and liquids. So almost all sources of groundwater are tainted by the weird. It's called weird water. It's got this silvery shine to it. If you drink it, it's kind of spicy and metallic. And that's where a lot of the buildup of that like blue in your skin comes from because people who can't afford cool water, the purified water, they have to drink the weird water, and then it means essentially that they're going to mutate faster. Um, there are water barons that have come up. They own distilleries that purify the water, but they get to charge their own prices. They gouge for it. Water has become more expensive than whiskey at this point. Cool water is a luxury. A lot of water barons will essentially charge fees for a town to be, if you pay your water tax for the month, you get water for the month. And if you can't afford that, sorry, you're out of luck. So that creates another interesting element, especially when it comes to like survival type themes. Is are you able to stock up on water if you leave town for so long? Where are you going to get water from? Are you going to drink this weird water? Are you going to keep going and go without until you can find cool water? It creates a lot of fun story moments in that way, and it really aligns with the robber barons of the age. Greed is everywhere. Just like the weird is everywhere, greed is right there with it. There are three main companies in Huckleberry that have created essentially monopolies. And each one is struggling against the other, trying to create one large monopoly. So there's the Huckleberry Fur Company, there's Skylar Manufacturing, and there's the Grand Union Bank. And each one exploits natural resources or people or something else to another extent, and it just creates layers of friction throughout this whole setting of the
Yeah.
Mavericks. Sometimes you have to take jobs for the companies. Sometimes the companies want you to do things that you may not necessarily agree with, and it causes you to decide, well, am I willing to sell my soul to this company, or am I willing to sell my soul to the weird? You don't always have good options, but it creates a lot of interesting choices along the way.
It's always nice to have factions to play off against. Okay, let's get into the rules here.
Yes.
Talk to us like kind of how you came up with it. As far as we already like briefly touched on like how the mechanics came to be, but when you decided upon it in the playtesting, what kind of stuck out to you as far as like, oh, I've got something here?
So I had a couple goals when I wanted the core mechanic. I wanted it to play fast. I wanted the players to be able to resolve it on their own. And I wanted to be able to use all my dice. I have a lot of dice, and when I'm playing a game, I want to be able to roll them all. So when I had this mechanic and it hit all three of those check boxes, I'm like, yeah, this is it. So the way Huckleberry works is that you've got 4 attributes and 9 skills, and you will always have a die size associated with each attribute and each skill. When you're doing the character creation, you have like an array where you assign your dice to those. When it comes time to actually roll, the attribute can be paired with any skill. So, for example, one of the skills is expression, and that could pair with grit, your strength, essentially, when you're trying to intimidate someone. It could pair with quick if you're trying to deftly communicate a topic stealthily, perhaps. It would pair with spirit if you're trying to empathize with someone, connect with them on an emotional level. And expression would pair with reckon if you're trying to just lay out a logical argument. So the attribute really is your intent of how you're going about and using the skill, and they all pair freely with each other. So that creates a lot of interesting options as well, and also has a little bit of a negotiation to it. A player can say, like, I really am better at this attribute. Is there a way I could go about using the skill in this way? From there, you roll both of your dice. There is an advantage disadvantage mechanic called raises and busts. So, say you would have a die, 2d10s is your roll, and you have a raise. One of your dice goes up to a d12, which also creates some interesting moments. If you have a d12 already and you get a raise on that d12, it goes up to a d20, and then you're really building up some momentum. Of course, it also goes the opposite way with the bust. D6 would go down to a d4, and then you're really struggling.
And how did the raises and busts work? Is it kind of like a luck pool that you can kind of draw from to get a raise and the
So
bust, or is it just advantage disadvantage?
it's more advantage disadvantage. There are ways to give it to yourself, especially if you have certain talents or traits that offer you raises to do things that you're good at. But also, it's about like narrative positioning. You know, if you're going to take cover behind some barrels, that means you'll get raised on a defensive roll later on. If you're trying to take a moment to aim, then you'll get a raise on your attack later on. So it really is about preparing as a character and taking steps to put yourself in the best possible position. And that's how you build up the raises. And then you can also assist each other. Like I was talking earlier, players can assist each other for free. So especially in a combat, if you throw an assist to someone else and they get an extra raise, they aim. That means they get 2 raises. That's when the magic really starts happening. Is when you start piling on those advantages to each other.
And talk to us
From
about
there,
the
yeah.
aces here.
So that kind of goes along with from there. You roll your dice and you're looking for a 10 or better. A 10 is a success, full stop. You always succeed. But you can do sort of a critical. So for every 2 over 10, you're dealt an ace. That's 12, 14, 16, 18. You can be dealt up to 4 aces on a single roll. And aces are essentially how you control when you crit. If you want to go to the next slide here, aces create this sort of cinematic feeling in the game. No longer will you like waste a crit on like a spot hidden check when there's nothing to find. If you build up those aces and you have nothing to spend them on, then you get to sleeve them for later. You can have up to 4 aces up your sleeve, and essentially you can use those to sweeten the pot for critical effects later. Or if you fail a roll in the future and you have sleeved aces, you can pull some of those out, you discard them, and it gives you +2 to your roll. So say you between your 2 dice, you only roll a 6. Then you have a couple aces up your sleeve, you discard both of them, suddenly you get a success. It allows you to balance things out, and it allows you to use momentum for things you're good at to help cover your bases for things that you're bad at. And again, Huckleberry is all about giving agency to players. It's about letting players make the choice of when they want to be really good at something or if they want to save it for later. And of course, there's still randomness. The weird is fickle. You cannot always control everything. You have a couple. There will still be an element of failure, but sometimes you can mitigate it.
And quick question here for you. And I know it's like early on in your game design process, but I imagine you've got ideas for having aces, physical aces that people can use at the table, cards or whatnot.
I've got too many ideas, way too many ideas. So right now, I suggest that you just take the 4 aces from your favorite playing card deck to use as tokens, and you just flip them up or down as you use them. But yeah, I definitely would love to have a player kit of some sort that has some aces and a couple other tokens. Because let's be honest, that kind of prop that you're using, it's so much fun to have at the table. When I play in person, I love having all the different pieces together to be able to play with. I've got little ammo trackers and things like that to let people like they're 3D printed that they can put the bullets into the revolver and stuff. So yeah, I've got a lot of ideas, but nothing is firm yet.
Cool. And then let's just talk about the basics of the character. And I have a character sheet I can bring up in a little bit,
Yeah.
but just for now, let's just talk about the broad strokes of it.
So from the very beginning, appearance is entirely the player's choice. Everyone is human, but like I said, the Wyrd can make people look very different from one another. So like on our screen here, we've got the Ironclad. She's this vaudevillian strong woman. The kids call it a muscle mommy these days. But you could be an Ironclad in so many different ways. Or like the trait Iron Fist, essentially, that you take. It could mean that you have a literal iron fist, like a metal hand. It could mean that you have a hand made of rock, like Hellboy. It could mean that you have a character that hits just hard as a truck, despite having no obvious reason to do so. And the traits that you choose when making your character are meant to give narrative inspiration, but they're not meant to constrict you. Huckleberry wants to give you options, but it doesn't want to take away options, which is why it's classless. When you build your character, you choose four traits: your blood, your flesh, your disposition, calling, and those just reflect different elements of your actual, whether it's physical traits or personality traits or skills. And then you can also earn traits like your legendary traits later on. But everything that you expect to be able to do in a Western setting, you can do. You can ride a horse, you can shoot a pistol, you can lasso a steer. If you want to try it, you've got a decent chance, especially if you've got some aces up your sleeve.
And maybe I'll just pop the character sheet on here.
Yeah.
I find a lot of people like they see the character sheet and they go, "Oh, okay, I kind of get it." So you got your 4 attributes at the top. You got some skills and some traits that you can build off of. And as far as the overall goal of the character is, or do you collect XP? Do you collect anything like that in the game?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that I really like about Huckleberry is that the advancement is tied into the narrative fairly well. So you'll notice a lot of the check boxes on like skills and traits and things like that. Again, shout out to Nathan D. Pauletta, did fantastic work. You can spend downtime essentially training certain skills, learning new traits, things like that. And those check boxes are how much downtime you spend doing that. That's only one aspect of your progression, though, because your big irons, your weapons, are a big part of your character as well. Every big iron is a weapon, but not every weapon is a big iron. A big iron is something that's like a customized piece of gear, something that the Maverick is intimately familiar with. Like your muscle memory would know exactly how far you need to pull back the hammer or squeeze the trigger. This is like an extension of yourself. And you can expand those, you advance those by taking jobs. You get paid in chips, which are like these weird silver poker chips, essentially. Only Mavericks are really able to take advantage of these because they are already immersed in the Wyrd. And it creates this sort of meta currency equivalent to XP, but it is an actual in-game item that you can pay for things with. And it allows you to like modify your big irons. You can buy mods for them, like as simple as adding a bayonet to your rifle or sawing off the barrel, or as extensive as like turning your revolver into a lever action revolver or adding a shotgun underbarrel to your gun. You are meant to customize your weapons. You're meant to form an attachment with your gun, and you're able to just tweak them in the way that suits your play style perfectly. And chips are a big part of how you do that, along with kits, which is another part of your gear. Kits are like it's gear that you don't necessarily have with you on a drive on a mission until you decide that it would have been useful to bring. So you don't have to plan your gear ahead of time. You have a whole list of options that you choose from, and how wealthy you are decides how many kits you get to use in an adventure. And like say, whiskey. Whiskey can be used to remove like a fear condition and things like that. And you don't decide that you brought whiskey until you have a fear condition or someone else does, and you're like, here, have this bottle of whiskey. It's a good thing I brought it. Like a little bit of a flashback. Like I planned ahead because I knew this would be useful.
Yeah.
Very similar to Blades in the Dark if you've ever played that.
Yeah, kind of retconning the whole thing, and we go, okay, yeah, we got this.
Yeah. And
Cool.
you're just pulling something out of your saddlebag that you hadn't mentioned was there before, but it was there the whole time, essentially.
Yeah.
And then another way to expand on your character is your calling card. So not all gear has like a mechanical purpose. Like it's not meant to be used to attack or anything like that, or for survival reasons. Uh, Huckleberry has several ways built in to reward role playing in exploring your character and both playing to your stereotype and against. Calling cards are things like family heirlooms or personal letters or something of like intense emotional value. And if you use that in a scene, you get a free ace just immediately. It's a way to build up momentum. So even if your luck and your dice are just screwing you all night long, you have ways to generate those aces without rolling.
I can't help but
Uh,
think of Hateful Eight and that letter that he possesses from
exactly.
the president.
Lincoln. Yes.
Yeah.
It's exactly like that. Yeah, awesome callback. It's exactly the type of thing that you're going for. Just something that he pulls out all the time, and it's so integral to his character. That's what calling cards are meant to be, and you get to use them every session too. So there's always a chance of getting an ace every single session. And talking also about more role play opportunity. This is an action horror game, but it's also a Western, and time is slow in Westerns. There's always time that's passing, and there's seasons pass in Huckleberry. Seasons are broke down into like 6 stretches or different periods of time, and players get to decide how to spend those stretches. So the GM will present a bounty board to players. This is a narrative representation here with all sorts of options, but we actually have virtual asset kit on the website that you can get for free. If you sign up for the mailing list, they'll email it to you, and you can immediately unsubscribe if you don't want more emails. But you get the virtual assets, and you can create your own bounties. You can print them off or use them on like a virtual tabletop. And it's just a prop essentially for your players to be able to say, this one, I want to hunt a werewolf next, or no, this boxing event, this sounds really interesting. Let's pursue that. And it gives players a little bit more agency. It's not full sandbox. It still has that structure to it, but it gives the players a chance to be like, this is what we're really passionate about. But
And
the
good
thing is,
plot
these
hooks,
bounties,
right? For
yeah,
the GM. What do you call the GM in this game, by the way?
we call him a trail boss. So
Okay.
yeah, the trail boss also gets to choose the bounties that are on there, so they get an element of choice as well. But these bounties have consequences, both for succeeding at them, failing at them, or ignoring them. You can't do all the bounties. There's not enough time. So some of them are going to drop off the bounty board as seasons progress. And that can mean that, like, maybe your favorite NPC in town goes missing because you didn't get to go hunt down that werewolf. Or if you actually succeed at clearing out this herd of awakened bison, then the railroad's going to come into town. They're going to start building the tracks. Whether that's a good thing or not, that time will tell. But the choices that you make during the bounty board phase will impact the world and change it and grow, essentially, which is a big reason why I leave the map a bit more vague, because players have a big effect on the world. Their choices will change what everything looks like. You essentially start in like a bus town of sorts, where like there was a lot of opportunity, but it's died out. Your players show up. Do you revive the town? Does the town wither and die? How invested do you become in the town? There is a whole cycle of things, from players going on the bounty to coming back to town to interacting with everyone, spending time training their skills, and then going back out on another bounty. So yeah, there's a lot of world building that goes in just invested on the player side.
Cool. And once
Yeah.
again, we got like this beautiful artwork that showcases the style and the vibes of the game. And maybe you can just tell us where you're at in the design process now and
Yes.
where they can learn more.
So Huckleberry right now is available, but it's in early access. The core mechanics of the game are entirely complete. The game is 100% playable. There may be a few tweaks here and there, but they're going to be very minor adjustments. It's not going to be anything like, you're not going to have to relearn the system or anything like that. Like I said, this game goes back a while, and I've play tested a lot. I had literally 100 hours of play testing just on my own of these core mechanics and everything. So we're definitely in the back half of design where we're going to be adding things like GM tools, like a bounty creation system, or how to create more hostels, the advice for running the game, things like that. There are going to be scenarios that get tied into the book that will come with the book for free. Everyone who gets the PDF now will receive all of these updates entirely free, plus a little bonus likely at the end. I don't want to get into there until we have something more concrete to announce, but just know that you are very much appreciated, and we will very much be rewarding that early support.
A quick question: how come you chose that option to uh, release the game versus, like, say, a Kickstarter or a backer kit or something similar to that?
It goes back to me just being a first time designer. And that means that I'm essentially still having to build up my reputation. I could have done a Kickstarter, but honestly, the results of that would have been likely middling without a lot of capital poured into marketing. So I figured early access was a good middle ground to get a little bit of support coming in, but also allowing people to just see what it is. People are able to experience it ahead of time. Whereas with a Kickstarter, you're taking a big leap of faith, like that 6 to 12 months later, you'll get a decent product. Now people can read reviews of it. Now people can actually see the PDF, or if they've got a friend that has it, they can, look at their friend's copy and decide whether they like it or not. Essentially, it was me saying that I believe in this product enough that I'm going to just put it out into the world regardless of whether it's crowdfunded, and believe that it'll resonate with people and grow from there. I'm choosing a longer term growth plan rather than just putting all my eggs in one basket.
And how does it work as far as, is it just digital at this point, or can you actually do a print on demand through
So
drive-through?
it is just digital at this point, and that's because I don't want to burn any goodwill with people who do the print on demand and then find out that, okay, there's another chapter that's added in a couple months, and I already printed it, so I'm not going to get that chapter. There will be a print run after the game is fully released, which will be late Q1, most likely Q2 of next year. And there will be constant updates in between. It's not like I'm going to be disappearing. You'll be getting stuff, the whole way there. But yeah, I didn't want people to get a print copy and then feel disappointed that they don't have the full book. That said, there actually are a few very limited amount of physical copies that I had printed for Gen Con where the game premiered. And we occasionally do giveaways of some of the extra copies. So if you check out the Huckleberry Discord, you'll be able to find some information out on that. And you might be able to snag a copy that's extremely limited. My go-to joke for this is that if you hold on to this will be worth in 10 to 20 years at least as much as a Beanie Baby. It's just that kind of exclusivity.
And how is it met at Gen Con? Like, did you have your own booth, or were you just selling it as part of a larger
So
space?
I did not sell it at Gen Con. I ran several games of it. I ran a game every single day at Gen Con, and I was blown away by the reception. I could not have been more excited. Everyone who, first of all, at conventions, it's well known that RPGs often have empty tables. I never had an empty table. There was only one table where I had two people that didn't show. That was the lowest amount I had the entire convention, which I thought was amazing. And everyone who was there was incredibly passionate, very well received, and uh, honestly, it was incredibly validating to be able to put it out into the world and have that kind of feedback. And then, of course, I gave away other physical copies of the book as well, but I did not actually sell anything. It was just there for me to say, we're releasing. This is in the world now. And what do you think? And the feedback was great. We've gotten reviews in already, and they've been great as well. So yeah, I'm really excited with how everything's going.
Cool. And the Lollygaggers also has some actual plays. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, yeah, they're doing actual plays. They're halfway through the introductory scenario that will be bundled with the book called the Divine Comedy. So they have 2 sessions already up on YouTube, Adventures in Lollygagging. And they've got 1 or 2 more sessions to go, depending on how things go this week. So we play Saturdays at 5 p.m. Central. And I'm there, but I'm not actually playing it, and I'm there for rules reference and things like that. Jeff Baker's running, and then the lollygaggers are playing, and it's been incredible. Jeff is an amazing GM, so it's great to see my little baby all grown up and taking on a life of its own.
Right on. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for coming on Daiku Game Pitch and sharing a little bit more about your what it looks like. I think Huckleberry looks like a really fantastic Weird West game, and you've put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it already, and I'm sure it's going to just keep getting better.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And it's been a pleasure being here. I've watched so many game pitches, so it's a lot of fun to be able to participate.
Well, if you are a game designer and you want to kind of come on Game Pitch and tell us all about what you're making and trying to get more people interested in your game, go to daikugames.com/gamepitch, and there's a form on there to fill out. And as always, tell them Game Pitch Gary sent you.
Hey friends, are you looking for a game that is not Dungeons or Dragons? Well, we got exactly what you need at Daiku Game Pitch. We got zines, we got OSR, we got adventures. But wait, there's more. We got solo games, we got journaling games, we even got card games and dice games. Oh hell, I don't even know what kind of game this is, but we got it. And if you visit us in the next 2 minutes, you're gonna get all the Zine Quest, Zine Months, Itch Fund, and Backer Kits Kickstarters that you can handle. Visit us at www.daikugames.com and tell them a Game Pitch Gary sent ya.